The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses and nonprofits better manage the employee experience by providing the tools, training, and resources they need to take the organization to the next level. To learn more, go to our website, thehrStoriesTeam.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, management and HR consultants Chuck Samickian and John Tallheimer dive into the stories that matter to small business owners, nonprofit leaders, and HR professionals. We continue to be amazed at how companies allow poor decision making, lack of knowledge, or in some cases, hubris to cause harm to their organization. Each week, we discuss stories where the companies must pay large fines, lose great talents, or even stain their reputation within the community. And then we tell you how to avoid the same fate. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. On this week's episode, John and Chuck dive into immigration debate, how employers must ensure employees are authorized to work in the United States. But first, here's what's happening in the HR news.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, John. Folks, my name is Chuck Samickian, and
I'm John Tallheimer.
And we are excited to be here with the HR Stories podcast. I got to tell you, we're in kind of a mood because we were just having a great time laughing about old commercials, old New York commercials. Crazy Eddie, come on down, buy your electronics. And we were joking that it's
Crazy Eddie.
Yeah, Crazy Chuck, come on down. It's HR time. Come on down. So it is HR time and employee management time, and how can we make your life more enjoyable, educational, entertaining, and all that great stuff here on the HR Stories podcast.
Also giving you the news you need, right? And so, Chuck, I don't know, what stories have you been following? What's been like in your mind? What's going on?
Sure. Well, do you want the gossip story of the day, or do you want the Littler survey says story?
I think we should probably start with the survey, and then we'll save the gossip for a little bit later. Oh my God, gossip?
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Chuck.
sure. So this is a report from Littler, which is they're kind of a think tank. They're a group out there. They employee management and things like that. But they just released a survey this past couple days ago that a lot of employers that turned to hybrid work schedules during the pandemic are still retaining that model of employees splitting their work time between the office and the home. And they're saying 70% of the U.S. employers surveyed use a hybrid working model when it makes sense, and but they also found that a lot of employers going into late 2023 into 2024 are going to start requesting and requiring more employees to come back to work. But the thought is only if there's a business case or necessity for it. So that's what most employers are doing now. They're trying to evaluate it rather than saying, oh, anyone can work from home or anyone can be hybrid. Now they're saying, okay, a lot of you can, but it makes more sense to be maybe a little more hybrid with your job, a little more remote with your job, and probably here every day for your job. So hybrid is here to stay, but there is a hybrid of the hybrid going on as we get more comfortable with this arrangement.
Yeah, I think that, it's good. I love it. Love that they have the data and stuff. And I read the other day, I think 80% of employees will look at flexibility as one of the top three, workplace flexibility as one of their top three reasons to take a job, right? And so People are looking at it, right? And again, some jobs are just not possible, right? If you work in retail, if you work in manufacturing, you work in the hospitality even. It's not like you can have a bartender work from home, right? Although I did see a robot bartender on the news the other day, which will make the perfect martini for you. Every job I think can be eliminated to some extent through AI or automation at some point. So it'll be interesting to see if we go there. I don't think we will, just because I think people like that interaction. There's something about going to a bar and hanging out with the bartender and talking to them. But it's interesting to see that, like, where companies are going. I think I told that story the other day, so I won't share it again, but it was about my friend going to the company and like he punches in, but then goes home, right? And so not good policies in place. And so I think there's so much there to do. And I think it's a really big thing. So I know, Chuck, you and I were talking about this. So I just did that retention class I was talking to people about, and I did it. And one of the factors in there for retention is flexibility in the workplace. And so I think people have to look at it. They have to be really open-minded about it and not just think about butts and seats.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So, yeah.
What do you got, John? What type of news have you seen out there?
Well, that was nice. I like that. What kind of news? You were going to say gossip, weren't you?
Yeah.
And so we are in a mood today, aren't we? Gosh, we record these on Friday, folks, and so sometimes it just gets a little slow there. Well, I was reading this article. It was in HR Dive. I don't know if you guys get HR Dive, but it's a newsletter that gives you lots of HR stuff. So definitely highly recommend it. But there was an article in there about ADP. And so ADP, one of their services they provide as a payroll provider is they will do background checks. And so this individual applied for a job, got the job contingent on passing the background check. So ADP they do two different types of checks. They have their proprietary background check software that they use. And then sometimes they will hire a third party to do the actual local background checks. Well, they'll go to the courthouses and look things up. Well, this individual did not get the job because ADP said that they had drug arrest on them. They had all these felonies and all these crimes on their thing. And the person's like, I've never done any of that. And so he lost his job. And then by the time the company got the report, it was too late. He couldn't go back and fight it. And so it was a mess. And so what happened was that third party company that ADP used got somebody with the same name, not the same social security number, but the same name messed up. And here's the thing though. And I want to make sure I say this because I think it's important. I'm not bashing ADP here. ADP has a 99% accuracy rate. 99% accuracy rate, which is pretty amazing when you're thinking about what they're doing. However, this individual is suing them under a class action lawsuit because that 1% equals over 100,000 people.
Yeah.
Right. So of course they're going to fight it. They're going to go in there, kind of talk about it and stuff. So this hasn't been settled. But the importance of knowing where your information is coming from when you're doing background checks is critical to make sure that you're getting right. Checking social security numbers, checking addresses and names, making sure they're spelled right, making sure that's same people. There are not many John Tallheimers in the United States, right? And so when you go look up me, okay, yeah, you're going to get one of maybe 20 of us. But for some people, there's hundreds, if not thousands of same people with the same name. And so we have to be careful with that. I think that was kind of the lesson that I kind of took away going, okay, so not bashing ADP here, but I just wanted to kind of pull it out because I thought it was an interesting story.
Yeah, no, I remember seeing that. And if I recall, even though he's suing them under the violation of Fair Credit Reporting Act. And I know there's a pre-adverse action letter, an adverse action letter. There's appeals that can be done. But if I remember correctly, there was some sort of appeal or some way he could have, and it didn't work out, or ADP wasn't allowing this appeal, and they didn't double check something. And so that's kind of the crux of that matter. Is it was basically like too bad, so sad, too bad, or too bad, so sad, good luck. And when that happens, when you blow people off like that, even a big corporation that's maybe, focusing on technology only and not the people side of things, those things happen.
Yeah, and so why the plaintiff was allowed to dispute the information, ADP only allows this after sending the report to the employer, according to the complaint. And so it was too late to fight it, right? And so
you lost the job.
Yeah, so lost the job, which is too bad. And so now, again, right, get it, right? And so these things happen. Of course, I think personal and that kind of stuff, I think it's technology versus persons and making sure that we're doing this right. So that's good. What wait, you got some gossip. I want to hear a little gossip story you're going to share with us.
Yeah, so speaking of losing your job, Tiger Woods' girlfriend, and I can't remember her direct name, she lost her job as girlfriend, and she is suing Tiger Woods. Erica Herman
is that an official HR title? Girlfriend?
Yeah. Well, in this case, so I saw this story come out, and I didn't understand really what's going on. I saw terms being thrown out: sexual assault, sexual harassment, and I thought, okay, maybe the assault thing, maybe they were together 5 years, they were, but why the harassment? Where's that? Well, it turns out that she was an employee of his. She was an employee of his. She worked as a manager in a restaurant that he owned. And then he started pursuing her, dating her, although there is a dispute of when their relationship started. But overall, the sexual harassment is coming in because she's saying that she was forced to sign an NDA or be fired. She felt like she had to date him or be fired. And so the whole quid pro quo comes in, where he's the owner, he's dating his employees, and now years later, this is the situation. There is an NDA that is holding fast, though, so we may never really hear the end of the story. But I did think it was fascinating that sexual harassment was layered in a lot of this situation.
Yeah, right. And so my assumption is that, and I don't know, maybe not. Maybe that she stopped working at the restaurant. I don't know that. As their relationship progressed, but angry girlfriend, angry breakup, boyfriend, girlfriend, doesn't matter. And if that was happening in the beginning of the relationship, again, how did that relationship start? That kind of stuff. I think there's going to be a lot of, you're right. We won't hear the whole story. But it is a good reminder, I think, Chuck, to think about your dating policies at work. How does that play across, that kind of stuff, and making sure you're buttoned up in those things, because you don't want this coming into your organization.
Absolutely. So that's the gossip of the day. But I know we've got some great stories today, too, unless you have another gossip or news to share, tidbit.
We have our new segment, Chuck, so we have to do our new segment, right? So Samantha, cue the music. It's time for this week's question. And so this is the question that came to us from one of our listeners. And so, Chuck, I want to get your thought on this. Here's the question. She was asking, so they're a small organization, and the organization as a whole wants to put the IT manager, the person that runs the computer program, all the computer stuff, under the HR director.
Yeah.
No one else has time to manage this person properly, so they've decided to put it under me. Is that right? Is that wrong? What do you think, Chuck? HR manager, should we have IT underneath us?
Well, like I tell companies, you can do whatever you want to do. But I think this company is probably looking at it like, well, this is a manager level and this person's a director. So the manager has to report to a director. And like she said in her question, no one else has time to manage this person properly. So, and I guess the answer would be is, hey, if that's what they're going to do, you're just going to have to accept it. Now, well, accept it or not accept it, right? If you don't accept it, well, then you better go back to the company with an alternative to say, hey, I don't think this is a great idea, and here's why, but here's an alternative suggestion, okay? Because we don't know too much of what's going on here. But I've seen this before. Where maybe HR has other things reporting up to them that are not directly, now safety, it's not directly HR, but it is HR. And I've seen security report up to HR. It's not HR, but it kind of could be HR. IT is a little bit more of a stretch. So my suggestion is, if you do accept this, is that you are managing the person, not so much the tasks, right? You're going to have to, I hate to use the word assume, but you will have to, ultimately you're going to be responsible for any of the IT projects, but you're going to have to count on this person as being the subject matter expert, letting them run with everything, but you're going to still need to have some sort of finger on the pulse on what's going on, because ultimately you will be held responsible. And maybe that's also what you tell your bosses, your managers, and say, look, I can only be held responsible so far for IT projects. I'm not an IT person. I will oversee this person. I will help oversee these projects, give this person to come to, but I'm going to need a lot of pass-through information where I'm going to send him and these ideas and projects to you. But that's my thought.
Yeah, and I think, to me, really what the underlying question is, and I hear this a lot when I'm working with leaders and managers, how do I manage a person who has a higher level expertise in a particular area than I do? And I got to say, this happened to me. When I was in corporate America. I was working for a big television network, one of the broadcasting networks. And my boss calls me into her office one day. She goes, hey, John, we've made some reorganizations and I need you to take over the salon. I'm like, excuse me? She goes, the salon, the people that put on the hair and the makeup and for the guest and the host and all those individuals, you need to oversee that. And I'm like, I don't know anything about hair and makeup. She goes, John, and I'll never forget this. She looked at me in the face and said, John, I am not hiring you for your expertise in hair and makeup. I'm putting you in that role because you're a great leader. And it was really, for me, that was a really wake-up call to go, oh, I'm a leader. So what does a leader need to do? We need to count on our experts, but I can set direction for the department. I can work on them to make sure that I'm hearing what level of services they're providing. I can talk to the guest. I could talk to the host. And as an IT person, you could talk to other people and see what they're doing. You can get that pulse, as you said, Chuck. You know what's going on, and then you could work with that person to get them to that higher level of performance if need be. Maybe they're great. Maybe they're already great and it's smooth, that kind of stuff. It's sometimes it's really interesting when we do throw those crazy pairings out there to all of a sudden these people two work together. I knew there were times in my corporate career where I was assigned departments or, moved into a department, which didn't seem to make sense, but I built really strong relationships. And then when I got moved to another place, I always had those relationships to go back to and I could count on them. And so I think when we think about being a leader, it doesn't mean we have the technical knowledge. It means we have the business know-how. That means we know how to be great leaders, and we can lead any team if that's the case. And so
absolutely,
it's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you bring this up, and I just think to myself, there's plenty of CEOs out there that take over different companies that go from company to company, oil to banking to entertainment to retail, and they don't know how to make shoes. They don't know how to make movies. They don't know how to pump oil, but they do it, and they're in charge, and they learn it because they are the leader. So great question, great answer, great wrap up. I love it.
Yeah, and so that's our segment. That was this week's question with Chuck and John. So next week we'll have a new question. If you want to put it in there, just send it. Our email address is in there. Just send us a question. We'll answer it at the next podcast. All right. I think it's time for our story. What do you think, Chuck?
Today's story sounds a little scary because, well, it's not Halloween time, but John's talking about the knock at the door. John, what is going on with the knock at the door?
Right. And you said earlier it was about the scary movie, right? And you hear that knock, right? And all of a sudden, like, the creepy music goes on. This is it, right? The United States Citizen and Immigration Service investigation knocks at your door. Oh
boy. That could be even scarier. Getting that letter in the mail, getting that knock at the door, getting that on-site visit. Very, very scary.
So has that ever happened to you, Chuck? Have you ever had the United States Citizen and Immigration Service show up at one of your properties?
Yeah, luckily, no, I have not. I have not had that opportunity. I have had other colleagues where they've shown up. They want to see the I-9 records, that sort of thing. But I've been lucky enough that I have not had that happen to me. But it can be very, very discombobulating and, what's the word? We start hyperventilating yourself internally.
Panic.
Yes.
A little panic. I had somebody in one of my classes, they had 472 employees, and ICE or Immigration Services showed up and said, we need to see your I-9s. Now, you have 72 hours to produce your I-9s. They had kept all of their I-9s in the personnel files. And so over that 72 hours, they worked 14 to 16-hour days to make sure everything was buttoned up before they had to hand them over. And so mistake, right? One of the mistakes, you have to kind of do that. All right. So let's get into the story, Chuck. In this story, an agent from the I'm going to call it ICE just because it's easier, knocked on the door at the Hartman Studios Incorporated, which is an event design and production company with offices in San Francisco and Atlanta, but operates worldwide. The company gross revenues were over $70 million in a recent audit. They were doing fine. The agent served them with a notice of inspection and agreed to postpone the inspection until March 4th, when Hartman gave the inspector the employee list, I-9 forms, payroll records, articles of incorporation, and other documents. At the time of the inspection, the Hartman had 718 individuals employed. It was not unusual because they were an event company, right? Mm-hmm. So it was not unusual for that number to go way up and way down. But at this particular time, they had 718 people working for them. And so it was changed there. So a few weeks passed, and ICE issued Hartman Studios a notice of suspect documents and a notice of technical or procedure failure.
Oh, okay. Wait, what? Go ahead. Say that again.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So a notice of suspect documents and a notice of technical or procedure failure. So let me explain what those are, right? Because that's now we're getting into government legal terms here that we need to know, right? Because it really doesn't depend on the right. A notice of suspect documents means that ICE has determined that the documentation presented by the employees does not relate to the employees or otherwise invalid.
Okay, so the documents the employees used and the company approved were not valid based on research ICE did, I guess?
Yeah, so they looked at the documents, right? They went through all the I-9s, right? So the I-9 form is the form companies use, right? Yeah. The I-9 form that companies use to make sure that people are properly documented to work in the United States. So they went through and looked at these documents, and they found in some cases that that documentation that was presented did not match the employee.
Oh, okay. Nice.
All right. And so now that notice of technical or procedure failure, this means that the technical procedures were not followed, right? So they were not followed. They didn't do them right. And ICE will give the company 10 days to fix the problem, like not having a proper signature on section 2 of the document.
Okay, got it. I mean, the I-9 form, it's been out for so many years right now. It seems pretty easy to follow the I-9 forms. But so what was the issue with the I-9s?
All right. So a few months later, ICE issued a notice of intent to fine. This is when it gets like scary to me. Like, okay, I got that, right? The notice of intent to fine. And Hartman decided to fight it and asked for a hearing.
Okay. So there were issues with the I-9s.
There was totally issues with the I-9s. Right? So where do you want me to start, right? There were many counts against the company, right? And so I'm not going to go through all the different counts. Some they didn't fight. For instance, 4 employees appeared to be on the employee list, but the company had no records of their I-9s. So they have this list of employees, and so when the agents go through the I-9s, there was 4 of them that didn't have I-9s.
Sure. And
right?
I've seen that. I'll edit small companies, large companies. Sometimes who knows what happens, right? So, but we got to go back a moment for our listeners. An I-9 is required, is a required form under the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. States all employers must have check an employee's eligibility to work in the United States, and actually their identity and their eligibility to work in the United States, and they must complete an I-9 form. There's no getting around that, ladies and gentlemen, folks. You've got to do your I-9 forms.
Yeah, I remember I was doing this presentation once, right? And I was doing an I-9s, and I finished up the I-9 section, and I don't know if I asked what your actions were. I asked something, and somebody raised their hands and said, "We don't have I-9s." And I'm like, well, at least you know what you're going to do tomorrow, right? Right. And so we have all of that. And so Hartman explanation, right? How did they explain this? Well, they really sidestepped the answer, right? And just threw up their hands and said, you are correct, right? They just said, you're correct.
Yes.
We don't have I-9s on these individuals. It happens, right? Maybe they got lost in the move. Maybe a new manager forgets to get an I-9. We know it happens, Chuck. I know when you do the audits, happens all the time. However, as HR representatives, we are responsible for auditing our HR, right? Our HR I-9s things. In this case, these 4 employees were terminated when they reviewed the I-9s before handing them to ICE.
Oh, ouch. Okay.
In other areas, the company forgot to complete the forms by entering the proper alien numbers on the form. So when you have somebody that works out of the country, that comes from out of the country, right? What they call alien, or the term now is used typically immigrants. There's a form, if they're on there, a work authorized thing, there's a form that needs to be filled up. You need to add that number in there. In a couple cases, they didn't do that as well. Yeah,
that's so important. And for them to terminate those employees, to think that no one would catch on, the minute you get that notice, John, everything is under the microscope. And you can't oh, geez, let me hide this, let me do this, But the bottom line, it is so important to make sure the forms are completed.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
Yeah. So how much time do we spend in our classes, really? Because you and I teach a lot of employment law classes. We teach HR law classes. And we review these simple mistakes that employers can make when doing I-9s. And why do we do that? Because we want to assure our clients get it right. However, those examples weren't the biggest problems Hartman faced, I guess. In fact, I don't think we would be discussing this story for the issues listed above. Minor mistakes here and there. Those types of issues can be commonplace, and we've seen it as we do I-9 audits. So I didn't put this here, I didn't put that there.
Yeah.
But what gets my attention, I guess, is 400 employees whose I-9s are not signed by the company representative. 400. So somewhere in there, they got bad advice or did not have advice.
Right, yeah. So there was 400 employees that did not sign or Section 2 wasn't signed. The employees signed it, but Section 2 wasn't signed. Right? And so that's a lot. But let's do this. Let's take a quick break. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to dive into that portion of the story because I think it's a lesson to be learned in that story.
All right, folks, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. We'll be right back.
Hello, listeners. I have some questions for you. Do you find yourself struggling with HR and employment issues? Are you afraid you could make the wrong employment decision that will cost your company thousands or even millions of dollars? Maybe you're new to the world of HR, or you've been in HR for a while and you just wish you had one resource, a guide to help you get HR right. Well, I've got good news for you. The team at HR Stories is excited to announce a new comprehensive resource, the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists. We created the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists as a simple, step-by-step resource guide packed with 70 downloadable checklists and other resources that help small businesses and organizations get human resources right. Even with very little HR or management experience, you can get instant results with concise, practical steps for addressing many of your tough employment issues. Do not miss out. Go to hrchecklist.com to learn more. That's hrchecklists with an S.com to learn more. And as always, thanks for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where the lesson is always in the story.
Welcome back to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. John and I are talking about I-9s and how companies make errors, and specifically one where there were over 400 people that did not sign their I-9s. But, you know, John, before we get back into that story, can we talk about our membership program, the membership program that we are starting for our listeners?
I love it. Yeah, let's talk about it. I love what we do on the podcast, but I know we want to take it to the next level. Why don't you tell them a little bit about what it's going to be like?
Yeah, sure. So what we have realized is our listeners want something more. And also our members on the HR Team of One community on Facebook, looking for a more, advice and support and peer networking. We realized whether you have 10 employees or 1,000, as HR professionals, it's important to get that support, to get the skills you need to be successful. And so in our profession, it can be difficult. We're challenged with keeping up with changes in employment laws.
Yeah, I think we have to fight to be the voice of our company, right? And so again, you always tell me that we are there to protect the company, and if we don't have a voice, that comes there. And I also think the other chance is, especially in today, we were talking earlier at the beginning of the top of the podcast about remote workers. A lot of times we're not connecting with other HR professionals, and so we need that chance to network with everybody. It's where a small group of dedicated professionals get together to share best practices, discuss their challenges, support each other to grow.
Yeah, and it's supporting each other more than just compliance. But how do you take that compliance, that education, that knowledge, and then how do you communicate it out? And we thought this was something our listeners needed. And so we are excited to announce that we are starting a membership program in June of 2023. Now, if you're listening to this later, obviously you can still join, but you are right now invited to join us. We are calling the Founders Price. Be the first one in. It's $395 per year, and it includes a whole bunch of stuff, including, twice a month learning sessions with John and I, an online forum, copies of our critically acclaimed reference guides, the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists, the Small Business Guide to HR, and a 30-minute one-on-one session with John and I on maybe what your HR needs may be, an HR coaching session. And that to me is priceless, John.
Oh, yeah, it is truly priceless. And I'm really excited about this membership program because I have seen the benefits of this. I've been in membership programs. I've led other membership programs. There's something so rich in time when you get to be working with a group of like-minded professionals that want to take it to the next level. It really does help us move and get there as well. I think those people who join will get so much from this. If you're interested in joining us, go to our new website, which is the team at hrstories.com/membership. And so that will be your place. We'll put all that link. We'll put that link. Sam will make sure that link is in the bottom, in our notes, all that kind of stuff. So just kind of do that.
So once again, folks, that's team at hrstories.com/membership. But that link will be in our show notes. Yes, this is so exciting. We should probably get back to the story now. But you said there were 400 employees whom the employer had not signed Section 2 of the I-9.
Yeah, right? So correct. So as you know, we are obligated as employers to have ourselves or an authorized representative to sign Section 2 of the I-9. And I quote, "I attest under penalty of perjury that 1, I have examined the documents presented by the above named employee. 2, the above listed documents appear to be genuine and to relate to the employee named. And to the best of my knowledge, the employee is authorized to work in the United States."
Yeah, I love it. You know how many people actually read that? And I've seen it, I've read it, and even now I'm like, oh man, it does say perjury, penalty, that sort of thing. I mean, that's a big deal, and a lot of people don't read that. So I see a company missing one. A lot of times I see maybe 10, but 2/3 of the employees, come on, what are we missing here?
Right. Yeah. And so here's the thing. Those 400 employees were members of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, Local Union 16. I was a proud member of OTC Local Union 403 when I worked in the theater for a few years. So I was an OTC member. I get it, right? So I will say I wasn't a very active member, but a member nonetheless. So unions complicate things, but you should not complicate the completion of the I-9s.
Yeah, right. If you're an employer, you still need to have an I-9 on each employee.
Okay, yeah, right. And you're wrong. As always, you're right, Mr. Smickian. Always. Right. So a few years earlier, Hartman Studios, the company we're talking about, had reached a collective bargaining agreement with Local Union 16 to supply Hartman with skilled stage technicians. Typically, Hartman was hiring these individuals on a project-by-project basis and treated them as on-call employees. So they were not terminated by the company after the project was done. They were always there, so if they needed them, they would just reach out to them and say, hey, I need you to come in and do this. So they were still on the payroll.
Yeah, so their I-9 was still good because they were employees, W-2 employees of the company.
Right, and they never left. They were never terminated after the project. They were still there. Right, and so here's where the company got in trouble. The union used a 3-in-1 form, which was a one-page document developed by the union that combined a portion of the W-4, a parts of Section 1 and 2 of the I-9 in a checkoff authorization that permitted the company to deduct wages and pay Local 16 the individual union dues, right? And so it would then automatically take from the employee's paycheck, it would always automatically take those dues and put them there.
Okay, so there are proper government forms, a W-4 and an I-9, that must be used, but you're telling me that instead of using those proper forms, they use these other forms produced by the union.
Yeah, 100%, right? These forms were completed by the skilled stage technicians and handed to the representative of Hartman Studio and then processed.
Yeah. See, that's not good.
Yeah,
That's
right?
not going to be good either.
No, right? And so the problem was that the union was not an authorized representative of the company. Remember, I read that definition that the employer or an authorized representative needed to sign the forms. So they didn't sign the 3-in-1 forms, nor did the company. When the agents reviewed the documents, the I-9 was not done on the right form, and the employer or the authorized representative did not sign them. A simple mistake that cost the company. Are you ready for this, Chuck? Are you sitting down?
Simple mistake. Simple mistake. Come on.
Simple. It was simple. Ended up paying over $600,000 in fines.
Oh, bejeezers. Holy heck. So, okay. All right. $600,000 for I-9 forms, folks. For I-9 forms. So what do you think happened? Why weren't they signed?
Yeah. All right. So here's what happened, right? The representative who was handed this information from the union, the company's representative who was handed this information, the employee, was the company's staff accountant.
Mm-hmm.
And they checked the employee's name, birth dates, social security, withholdings, and checkoff authorization. Right? Because that's what an accountant would look for.
Right.
I'm looking for those things because that's going to impact my day or my work, but did not review their identity or work authorization documents. She wasn't trained as an HR person.
Yeah, so that's why lawyers, employment, HR consultants have so much work. I guess, luckily, in some ways, employers don't know any better, and they give someone HR responsibilities, and then they fail because they're not trained, and then the company doesn't do audits, and suddenly they're paying fines.
Right? And it's so frustrating when we come across this in our work, right? And so when we're going in to do an audit with a company, or we're working with a manager or a leader of the company and they're dealing with this, they don't know how to deal with it. And we try to convince them this is the way to do it. We know that HR assessments can save companies, our HR assessments particularly, can save companies hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines and penalties.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Look, I just got this idea, and if you want to edit it out later, we can. But I want to do something for our listeners.
Wait a minute. Is this one of your crazy ideas that you always throw out there, and then Sam and I have to convince you to kind of take that out?
Well, here's the deal. Like we talked about earlier when we kicked off the podcast, we talked about crazy HR, crazy Chuck, crazy Eddie. Remember? Come on down. All right. Crazy Chuck. Yes. Here's what we're going to do. Okay. I just want to throw this out, John. If you want to edit it out later, that's fine. But folks, if you send us an email, info@thehrStoriesTeam.com, and you do it by June 15, 2023, I'll tell you what. We will do an HR assessment for your organization. If you have fewer than 50 employees, we'll do it for you. And I'll tell you what, let's just for $2,750, $2,750.
What? Wait, what? What did you just say? $2,750?
Yeah, that's
we typically charge between $5,000 and $10,000, Chuck.
Yeah, I know. And I even if you have a few more than 50, we're good with that, because I'm telling you, we're going to sorry, John, it would save thousands of dollars for companies. And folks, this is not just, hey, let me look at your I-9s. We'll do a full assessment to see where you are in your compliance, your Department of Labor, your Fair Labor Standards Act, your all that great stuff.
All right, so you're telling me, Chuck, that for $2,750, they're going to get our HR audit / assessment, which their HR diagnostic audit, I guess that's our official term, where we review the I-9s, FLSA compliance work, the required posters, personnel needs storage, job descriptions, employee relations processes, timekeeping methods, recruitments, onboard talent developments, and retention practices?
Yep. Just send us an email, info@theHRStoriesTeam.com. And we will get you scheduled for an HR assessment from one of our consultants, which is basically us, John, the team at HR Stories. Like I tell folks, I love HR. so you don't have to. I tell people this. It's one of my little taglines. But we love doing this and helping companies out so you can enjoy your, work and personal life much better.
So is there a code they need to send, Chuck, so they can get this deal?
Well, we could use Chuck is the best. I don't know. Chuck is crazy. HR crazy. What do you think?
All right, I think we go with Chuck is crazy. But all right, I get it. You're a full partner here. You can make these decisions. That's a deal. I'm going to tell you, listeners, that is a deal. I can't believe you just said that, Chuck.
Are you nervous? Are you nervous? Can we deliver?
We can deliver, right? We will deliver. We will deliver. Listen, take advantage of it. We love coming in to do an audit because here's what the audit does, right? I just want to set this for you. It gives you the opportunity to have an outside person come and assess your HR area, right? And so we come in, we look at that. We're going to give you this full, great report of where we think you can work on. Here's the things you need to do better. Here's where you're doing things great. And you'll walk away going, all right, here, you'll have an action plan, right? You will have an action plan that you can take actions on. So it is definitely something in there as well. We want you to avoid mistakes like the Hartman Studio Company made.
Yeah, sorry I interrupted you, John. So let's get back to the story. Anything else you want to share? How are we wrapping up the Hartman story and I-9s?
Yeah, I'm a little like my heart's racing a little bit that you made that decision, but we'll talk. Maybe we'll edit all that out. Maybe we'll keep it in. We'll talk. All right. So before we go, I want to give you some quick I-9 tips to make sure you get your I-9s right? And so this is part of our short story series. And so we're just going to go through these. I'm going to go through each one of them, kind of throw them out there so you will have them. I will say that in the Ultimate Book of HR Checklist, we have a great I-9 checklist. Some of these things are directly from that, but here they are. Here are the 8 tips you need to do. Number 1, have someone audit your I-9s on a yearly basis to make sure everything is right. We always advise having a third party do that because it's better to have somebody doing it from the outside. That way you can focus on your job, have somebody do that. Number 2, make sure you're using the most up-to-date form, which, as of this recording, is the one that expired 10/31/2022. That's right. I also recommend that you use the fillable PDF form on the website, the United States Citizen and Immigration Service website. It helps reduce errors a lot, so we always recommend using that. Make sure each new employee completes section 1, including the signature section, by the end of the first day for pay. Number 4, don't let them leave boxes empty. Use NA if it's not applicable. Right. So if they don't have additional last names been used, there should be an N/A in there. Provide the employee with a list of acceptable documents before they arrive to work for that first day. So I always like sending employees new employee paperwork the week before so they can go through it. They can know what documents they need to bring in. They can fill out their W-4, get help if they need for their W-4. Number 6, the employer should complete section 2, including the signature section, by the end of the 3rd day, right? Before the end of the 3rd day, it needs to be completed. Double check your documentation. Make sure it is correct for the employee, right? So make sure that that documentation is the right documentation for that employee. And then finally, store your I-9 in 2 binders. One for active employees and one for terminated employees, and then removed expired I-9s from the terminated file after the appropriate amount of time.
Yeah, great tips. Great tips that will help avoid thousands of dollars in fines, because when they do come in, ICE comes in, they may look at one I-9, they find 5 errors, they're going to ding you 5 times. And I think they're like $149, $199 per error, something like that. Yeah.
I think it's in the 200s now.
Yeah, so it's a lot of money per error. So.
And I want to say, that this just happened is the United States, the Department of Homeland Security, will end as of July 31st, I think it is, will end the flexibility requirement in terms of looking at the physical document. So during COVID and up to July 31st, we had the ability to look at there's things through a video call or a digital scan. That ends July 31st. The other part of that is we have to go back now. And for all those employees that we saw digital documents, we have to go back and look at the real documents. So be aware of that. That's hot news. That just came off, just happened this week. So just kind of diving into that as well. All right, listeners, do yourself a favor. Take advantage of Chuck's offer. I know he's a little crazy. He goes out on the limb sometimes, but it's going to benefit you. It will definitely benefit you and your organization. Make sure that you're doing that. Anything else you want to add, Chuck, about the offer?
No, just email us. John, I don't know if we need a code phrase. I think as long as they email us and they want to say Chuck is the best as a code phrase or anything like that, and we will get you scheduled. We will get you a proposal, and we will work with you to complete your HR assessment at a cost of reduced cost $27.50, and that's a great deal to have two HR and leadership professionals that do this all the time for you in your back pocket, helping you out.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. In this case, the lesson is to make sure you get your I-9s done right.
Done right. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.